Imagine a world where the roar of an engine was as much about identity as it was about transportation, where every curve of sheet metal carried the weight of aspiration, and every padded seat spoke of comfort in a turbulent time. Picture a machine that promised to turn a simple drive into an occasion, where stepping inside felt less like commuting and more like stepping into your own private lounge. This was an era of bold shapes, long hoods, and luxury cues borrowed from the grandest of rides, distilled into something within reach of everyday Americans. But beneath the vinyl roofs and plush interiors, pressures were mounting, gas prices rising, regulations tightening, and consumer expectations shifting like sand under the tide. The question was never just whether these cars could sell, but whether they could adapt, survive, and define the decade itself. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with which vehicle or era you'd like us to cover next. The 1979 Chrysler Cordoba 318 entered the automotive stage at a moment when Americans craved comfort and prestige without the towering price tags of top-tier luxury. This personal luxury coupe promised a blend of refinement and approachability, with the 318 cubic inch V8 engine as its steady heartbeat. To understand why it became such a cultural marker, we need to step inside its world of plush interiors, Landau roofs, and subtle ambitions. Because the Cordoba 318 was never just transportation. It was an invitation to experience success in a driveway-friendly package. And yet, behind this promise lay the realities of a shifting market, oil crises, and a brand fighting to hold relevance. Microstory. Imagine pulling up to a suburban dinner party in 1979. Headlights glowing against brick ranch homes and manicured lawns. The Cordoba 318 wasn't about raw performance, but about arriving with dignity. Sliding into the velour seats with the faint smell of vinyl and the comforting rumble of the V8 was like stepping into a private retreat. For buyers who wanted elegance without extravagance, it offered an identity, a car that suggested they had made it, or at least were on their way. Microstory on city streets. The Cordoba 318 stood out for its long hood and wide stance. Its opera windows and padded vinyl roof caught the evening light, projecting an image that was equal parts confidence and comfort. Unlike stripped-down compacts of the era, this was a statement. One didn't merely drive, one glided. Owners recall the pride of polishing those chrome accents on a Sunday morning, knowing neighbors noticed. It was a car meant to be admired at rest as much as in motion. Microstory. For Chrysler, the Cordoba 318 wasn't just another coupe. It was a lifeline. The late 70s were unkind to Detroit automakers, but this model provided a spark of success. Television ads hinted at sophistication, while showrooms buzzed with curious buyers drawn by the promise of attainable luxury. The Cordoba carved out a niche between economy cars and high-dollar cruisers, proving that ambition could be sold in affordable packages. Context Digest. The personal luxury coupe trend had been building throughout the 1970s, a reaction to a society that valued comfort and status markers. Cars like these weren't about blistering speed. They were about how they made drivers feel, both inside the cabin and in the eyes of others. Americans wanted smooth rides, plush interiors, and design cues that echoed top-of-the-line sedans without paying top-of-the-line prices. The Cordoba 318 was Chrysler's exact answer to this craving. Context Digest. The 318 V8 was more than just an engine. It was Chrysler's workhorse, tuned for reliability rather than outright power. Buyers in 1979 trusted it to start on cold mornings, haul family luggage on road trips, and deliver a dignified hum on the highway. This steady reputation made the Cordoba 318 a safe choice at a time when other engines were gaining reputations for guzzling gas or struggling with new emission standards. The 318 quietly reassured drivers that luxury could also be dependable. Context Digest. The interior was designed to impress with available crushed velour, deep carpets, and wide cushioned seating. Unlike Spartan economy cars, this was a space meant for lingering. The Cordoba 318's cabin was less about utility and more about atmosphere. Button-tufted seats, wood-grain accents, and thick doors that closed with a reassuring thud. It created an environment where every drive felt elevated, even if the destination was only the grocery store. Reflection Bridge. The story of the 1979 Chrysler Cordoba 318 is as much about cultural aspiration as it is about engineering. It thrived not because it outperformed rivals, but because it tapped into a shared desire for dignity. The question, though, was how long such a formula could survive under the pressures of an oil crisis and changing consumer priorities. Which brings us to the next chapter. What happened when comfort collided with crisis, and the Cordoba 318 found itself at the crossroads of luxury and survival? The 1979 Chrysler Cordoba 318 entered its second act under the weight of shifting forces that no amount of vinyl roofs or velour seating could entirely mask. The same car that promised an oasis of comfort suddenly had to answer to fuel prices that doubled overnight, insurance premiums climbing steeply, and government rules that clipped the wings of big engines. Within 30 words of describing the Cordoba 318, one has to confront this reality. Its charm was built on presence and comfort, not efficiency, and that contrast grew sharper as the late 70s wore on. Micro-story. Picture a buyer filling the tank during a gas line crisis, standing beside the Cordoba 318's wide flanks. For a moment, the proud owner feels out of step with the times. The V8 still idles smoothly, the opera windows still shimmer under the streetlights, but the cost of each gallon makes the coupe feel like a guilty indulgence. This wasn't unique to Chrysler. The entire personal luxury segment was caught in the same squeeze. Yet for Cordoba owners, the dilemma was immediate and personal. Micro-story. In the engineering rooms, the Cordoba 318 represented a compromise. The 318 engine delivered a balance of manageable performance and better economy than the massive big blocks of the previous decade. It wasn't thrilling, but it was steady. As engineers fought to adapt carburetors, emissions controls, and gearing, the Cordoba became a testbed for making luxury feel responsible. Buyers weren't fooled entirely, but many accepted the compromise, grateful for a car that still looked the part while drinking less than its predecessors. Micro-story. On dealership floors, salesmen leaned on the Cordoba 318's reputation. They reminded customers of its proven V8, of its quieter ride compared to smaller imports, and of the pride it gave when parked in a driveway. The pitch was no longer about opulence alone. It was about dignity in an uncertain time. In this sense, the Cordoba straddled two worlds, still a symbol of luxury, yet increasingly marketed as a reasonable choice in a nation of shrinking expectations. Context digest. The broader auto market of 1979 was turbulent. Compact cars were gaining traction, fueled by rising fuel costs and a desire for efficiency. Imports were arriving with credible reliability and lower running costs, reshaping consumer expectations. Against this backdrop, the Cordoba 318 had to defend the very idea of a personal luxury coupe, even as the trend that created it began to fade. Its survival hinged on convincing buyers that comfort was worth the trade-offs. Context digest. Chrysler's financial condition added another layer of drama. The company was struggling, battling debt and declining sales across multiple lines. The Cordoba 318 was not just a model, it was a pillar in Chrysler's fight to stay alive. Each sale mattered, each advertisement carried weight, and each showroom delivery gave the company another breath. In this way, the Cordoba wasn't just a car, but a symbol of a corporation's resilience. Context digest. Owners often expressed a paradox. They loved the comfort and presence of the Cordoba 318, but worried about its timing. Owning one felt like having a piece of the American dream, just as that dream was becoming more expensive. Letters to car magazines of the era, while never naming rivals, reflected both pride and unease. Buyers clung to the identity the Cordoba gave them, even as practicality whispered in their ears. Reflection bridge. The Cordoba 318 had weathered storms by leaning into its strongest qualities: comfort, dignity, and dependability. But by the dawn of the 1980s, the tide was turning, and even the most loyal buyers had to ask if personal luxury still had a future. That question leads directly to the final chapter, the legacy the Cordoba 318 left behind, and how it defined an era even as that era slipped away. The 1979 Chrysler Cordoba 318 carried its identity into the new decade, with the burden of knowing the world around it was shifting faster than its vinyl roof could shelter. Within the first 30 words of describing the Cordoba 318, it's clear that this coupe symbolized more than transportation. It embodied the final expression of a uniquely American desire for attainable luxury. By the early 1980s, however, the world was ready for smaller, sharper, more efficient designs. and the Cordoba's wide stance and soft ride felt increasingly like relics. Microstory. Imagine an owner in 1982 polishing the chrome of a Cordoba 318 on a Saturday afternoon. The car still turned heads, still whispered promises of success, but on the same street, a neighbor might have parked something smaller, newer, more efficient. The owner felt both pride and nostalgia, realizing that the Cordoba now represented a lifestyle fading from the mainstream. It wasn't irrelevant. It was simply of another time. Microstory. Chrysler itself was forced to evolve. The Cordoba 318 had once been a lifeline, generating sales when the company needed them most, but the tide of consumer preference demanded new directions. The coupe's plush interior and steadfast V8, while beloved, couldn't compete indefinitely with the lure of efficiency and modernity. For Chrysler, the lesson was clear. Luxury could not stand alone without adapting to practical realities. Microstory. Among enthusiasts today, the Cordoba 318 occupies a fascinating place. It isn't remembered as the fastest or the rarest, but as one of the last cars to fully embrace the personal luxury philosophy. Owners cherish them not just as vehicles, but as artifacts of a cultural mood. The final notes of a symphony played before the industry moved on to a different song. Context digest. The legacy of the Cordoba 318 rests on three pillars: accessibility, aspiration, and identity. It allowed middle-class Americans to experience a touch of prestige at a time when status mattered deeply. It connected emotional desire with mechanical reality in a way that imports and compacts of the time rarely attempted. This positioning explains why it is still remembered with affection, even by those who acknowledge its limitations. Context digest. In the grand timeline of American cars, the Cordoba 318 represents a bridge between excess and restraint. Its dimensions and comfort spoke to the indulgent 70s, while its manageable engine and marketing hinted at a future of pragmatism. That duality makes it a fascinating study in transition. A car caught between two eras, never fully belonging to either, yet leaving fingerprints on both. Context digest. For collectors and hobbyists, the Cordoba 318 has gained a quiet cult following. Its availability and relative affordability make it an approachable classic, while its unmistakable styling secures it a place at shows and gatherings. Nostalgia fuels its appeal, but so does the recognition that it marked the end of something, an era when personal luxury defined driveways across America. Reflection bridge. The story of the Cordoba 318 closes not with a downfall, but with a reminder of how tastes change and how cars reflect the society that builds them. And so we return to the heart of this narrative. What does the Cordoba 318 mean now, and how should we remember its impact? The 1979 Chrysler Cordoba 318 remains a vivid symbol of what Americans wanted at the close of the 1970s: comfort, dignity, and the feeling of luxury within reach. Mentioning the Cordoba 318 within the first 30 words of this summary underscores how it captured the aspirations of a generation just before the tide turned toward efficiency and restraint. This was never the fastest car on the road, nor the most technically advanced, but it embodied a cultural mood that mattered. For everyday buyers, the Cordoba 318 was a statement that their hard work and ambition could be reflected in a machine that looked sharp in the driveway and felt indulgent on the highway. As an ownership reality, the car was dependable if not exciting. The 318 V8 offered a compromise, steady enough to last, efficient enough compared to the massive blocks it replaced, but not immune to the rising costs of fuel. Maintenance was straightforward. Parts availability remained strong for years, and for many buyers, this was the sweet spot between practicality and pride. It was never about tearing up the quarter mile. It was about cruising with confidence. In the US market, the Cordoba 318 played a strategic role for Chrysler. It was the model that attracted middle-class buyers when the company needed them most, keeping showroom traffic alive during lean years. Its marketing made it aspirational, but its pricing made it achievable, striking a balance that rival manufacturers would struggle to emulate. In hindsight, this made it a crucial part of Chrysler's survival story, even if it wasn't recognized as such at the time. The legacy of the Cordoba 318 is one of transition. It was both the high point and the turning point of the personal luxury coupe era, a car that perfectly reflected the values of its moment, yet could not extend beyond them. For collectors and enthusiasts, It offers nostalgia wrapped in chrome and velour, a reminder of an America that still dreamed big even as its world was narrowing. In cultural memory, the Cordoba 318 is not just a footnote. It is a chapter, a car that defined what it meant to aspire in the late 1970s. And that may be the most lasting impact of all, the realization that cars are never just machines. They are reflections of who we are, what we want, and the times we live in. The 1979 Chrysler Cordoba 318 will always stand as proof that luxury isn't only about wealth or power. It can also be about giving ordinary people the chance to feel extraordinary.